Last Sunday, for the gospel, we heard perhaps the most popular of all of Jesus' parables, the parable of the sower who threw the seeds in different lands, and each land bore different fruit. This present Sunday, again, the church offers us a new parable, a different parable, in which we will see again seeds appearing, some good seeds and some bad seeds. So today in this homily, I would like to share with you 3 insights so that we can better understand and grasp the gospel that the church is offering us to nurture our lives. In the gospel, we find that when the slaves found out that the weed was growing together with the wheat, they were very disappointed and frustrated because they thought that all of the work they had done had been in vain. So what do the slaves do? They go over to the householder and they tell him, "Do you want us to pull out everything? Do you want us to destroy everything we've been working for because of the weeds?" And I think that in many occasions in our lives, when we feel frustrated, we act exactly in the same way as the slaves do. We forget that in the situation we're living, because of the frustration we're experiencing, we see only the weeds and forget that there is also, in many occasions, weeds that are worthwhile saving. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes it may happen that parents get frustrated with their kids. Maybe they've told their kids 100 times, "Don't let your socks lying around." Or maybe they've told them 2,000 times, don't let your things lying around. Of course, this doesn't happen in Catholic households, because in Catholic households, kids do everything their parents tell them, right? So, what happens with the parents? They feel frustrated. And maybe, when they see their kids, they only see the weeds. And they forget that there's also wheat. And what do the parents want to do? They want to tear everything apart. And what do they do when they are frustrated? They correct or they educate their kids, not from charity, but from anger and frustration. And there is a saint called Saint John Bosco, who is perhaps the best educator. He is said to have promoted over 10,000 priesthood vocations. And you know what Saint John Bosco said? He said, when you lose your temper with a teenager or with a boy or a girl, and you correct them with anger and frustration, that is very easy. We can all do that. And we all tend to do that. But when you're capable, pay attention, when you're capable of understanding that even when you only see weed, there is also wheat in that person, then you can correct from charity and from the gospel. So I think that in today's gospel, the first thing I want to convey is there is a great injunction for us to be patient and to resist the temptation of frustration of thinking, in this situation, all I can see is weeds, and then acting from the frustration. Brothers and sisters, I think that the first challenge we can accept from this gospel is this week, do not act upon the frustration, but give yourself the patience and the time to remind yourself that there is always wheat when you sometimes can only see weed. Think about John Bosco when you think about losing your temper. Second idea, In the gospel, we find a mysterious character, a character that during the night, when everybody is sleeping, he does his wrongdoings. He starts throwing the seed of the weed. I ask you a question, brothers and sisters. This person who acts during the night, this person who acts while nobody is watching, who is this person? And the answer should be clear for all of us. That person is an image of the devil. You know why? Because the devil is a specialist in working in a clandestine fashion. He always wants to work in such a way that he is not noticed. You know why? Because when he is noticed and discovered, he loses all his power. Maybe you have heard this, but in an exorcism rite, the moment when the demon starts to lose power over the possessed is the moment when the demon reveals his name to the exorcist. Why? The same principle is at work. When the devil is acting undercover, he's powerful. But when the devil is uncovered, he has no power at all. Why am I offering you this reflection? Because I think it is extremely useful for all of us to understand and to be conscient that we are all in a spiritual battle and that we are in many occasions tempted and we don't even know it. And I want to give you an example. If this week you have had thoughts that lead you to division, for example, division between spouses. If this week you have had thoughts about division among your family members, if this week you had thoughts that divide you from your wife or from your husband, if you had thoughts that led you to fear or to be judgmental or suspicious, I can guarantee you those thoughts are not only thoughts or are not always only thoughts. In many occasions, there are also temptations that are entering undercover in your life. But look at the attitude of the householder. He says right away, it is the enemy. And I think here there is a very useful injunction because the gospel is telling us. Are you capable of identifying the enemy in your life? Are you a man or a woman awake enough to uncover the demon when he comes and starts to tempt you in your life? Or are you asleep like the characters in the gospel? So ask yourself today, in what clandestine ways is Satan working in my own garden, putting the seed of the weed, and I'm too asleep to notice? Last insight. In the final analysis, God allows the wheat and the weed to grow together in the land. And the church fathers always understood this image of the wheat and the weed growing together as an image of the church. Because in the same Catholic Church, we will have always wheat and weed. We will have great saints like St. John Bosco, who I mentioned today. And together with St. John Bosco, we will always have weeds, like the bad testimonies we have heard about in the last years. Should we be surprised, scandalized, disappointed, discouraged when we hear and we find out that there are weeds in the church? I think we shouldn't, because the gospel warns us about these weeds. And I think there is a certain naivety in feeling disappointed or discouraged or suspicious about the church when you find weed. Of course, we should try in our own lives to be always wheat. But come on, when people tell you, I drew away from the church because of the bad examples in the church, it's clearly they never heard this gospel. Because wheat and wheat grow together. And if you come to think about it, wheat and wheat also grow together in your life and in mine. Why does God allow this? And I finish with this example. In many occasions, brothers and sisters, when a priest is sitting in a confessional, one will receive penitents who come over and over again with the same sins. Many occasions, you see men who are struggling against vices. Many times against vices that have to do with lust. And I always like encouraging penitents with the following idea. Obviously, it is frustrating to find yourself sinning and falling again over and over into the same pit. But you know why? But you know what? I think that God allows the weed in our own life, the weed in the life of the penitent, because then a beautiful weed can grow. You know, the weed of the humility. Sometimes we think that being pure is the most important thing and the most important virtue in a Christian life, and that is wrong. St. Augustine taught us that the whole spiritual building has one foundation. You know what is the foundation of the spiritual building? Humility. So today, if you find weed in your life, if you're struggling with a vice, if you're a person who goes to confession frequently because you fall in the same sin, today I want to tell you, God allows this because He wants a beautiful wheat to grow in your land. The wheat of humility that is much precious than the wheat of purity. Of course, we should strive to be at the same time pure and humble. But if we struggle with purity, at least this will allow the wheat of humility to grow. So, brothers, number one, this week, be patient. Don't act from your frustration. Remember that together with the weeds, every person has wheat. Wait for a better time to do the correction or to let that person know where he went wrong. Second, remember that the demon is always planting the seed of the wheat while you're asleep. Be awake so you can say, that is the enemy. The devil has power when he's undercover, but when he's discovered, he has no power. And lastly, remind yourselves I'm sorry, I went blank. Lastly, remind yourselves, wheat and wheat always grow together. If you find wheat in your life, allow this to grow the wheat of humility.